Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Beards and Cars, the more informal, free-form series where we talk about stuff which isn't necessarily in the field of tunes or reviews. It's more just gaming talk in general, or even non-gaming stuff. It could be about movies or YouTube, or whatever the case may be. And in this particular pick, I wanted to talk to you guys and with you guys about features that you would like to see, and of course that I would like to see in a racing game. Not necessarily specifically in Gran Turismo, or specifically in Forza, or any specific racing franchise or single game, but just stuff which you would like to see featured in any racing game or racing franchise that you love, be it Gran Turismo, Forza, Need for Speed, Test Drive Unlimited, whatever. Now, these things are sometimes variations on a theme, such as with tuning, that kind of thing, and some of these things which I would like to see have been, at least in part, featured on some existing car games. But there are 6 things in particular which I would love to see featured in, say, a Gran Turismo game or a Forza game or whatever. Some of these things I think have a chance of being featured, other things I think probably not. They're not necessarily too outlandish, but they're just things which I don't think many people would see as overly important, or that a game developer would see as being overly essential to include in their game. But as I said, for me personally, they are things which I would love to see. And the first thing which I would love to see featured on a racing game is a pretty simple one. And the thing that I would like to see is certain vehicles in particular, be it classics, vintage cars, but some modern ones as well, such as supercars, but some vehicles which, instead of depreciating in value as they do on literally every racing game, instead of that, buying a car and then it's immediately worth half the credits or a third of the credits, or if you win a car and it's worth nothing to sell, that kind of scenario. What if instead of that you had a system where certain vehicles, and not just random ones or not every car, but certain specifically chosen vehicles that are justified in doing so, actually appreciate in value rather than depreciate? Now, that may sound like something which doesn't really have that much relevance or importance, but if you think about it, in real life, there are certain people who specifically buy certain vintage Ferraris or classic Maseratis or even modern supercars with no intention of ever driving it. They just buy it as an investment. That is something which should be on a racing game, especially one like Forza and Gran Turismo, which doesn't overly specify itself as being a motorsport game, but also has street cars as well. Because the simple fact is, certain vehicles should not be worth less when you come to selling them. Now, the reason why they do that in games is pretty easy to understand. Of course, you don't want it to be too easy for a player to just make money basically for doing nothing, because you could buy a car for, say, 500,000 credits and then sell it for 1,000,000. Well, of course, somebody would just keep on buying that car over and over again and earning a silly amount of money. But my point is, my counterpoint to that, why is that a bad thing? At the end of the day, by not allowing people to do that, you are actually cutting off a legitimate part of the reality of buying and selling cars. The simple fact is, there are cars which do that in real life. How do you think people who collect cars make a profit? That is exactly how. They buy a classic Ferrari, they restore it, and then they sell it for a huge profit. Not every car does that, of course, and that's my point. You don't have to have every car in the game appreciating in value, but if you tell me that I'm going to go out and spend 20 million credits on, say, a Ford GT40 on Gran Turismo 6, and then immediately that car is worth, I don't know, whatever it's worth on the game, I've never actually checked, probably something like 6 or 7 million to sell it. Less than half, probably. That is ridiculous. That is just not the way that car sales work. And at the end of the day, this whole idea of not wanting people to make money too easily is stupid. Because what if I want to do that? At the end of the day, a racing game should not just be about driving for money. What if I am more of a businessman than a driver? For me personally, that is the case, and that's why I love some of the older Forza games so much, when you could have your own storefront. On Forza 4, for instance, I used to earn stupid amounts of money on that game without doing any races at all. Now, some people don't like that way of doing things. That's fine. You're not forcing people to do that. But the way that I used to make money is by making designs for people, by making decals for them to stick on their car, and they would pay me a certain amount of credits. And the way that they do that is by selling a certain car in the storefront that was worth a certain amount for a lower price. Then I would buy that car for the cheap and get the value from it, selling it myself. Now, that way of doing things is much more of a business transaction than a racing career. But what if I prefer that? By not allowing us to do that, they are restricting us to less and less ways of making money. Now, the whole idea of having to grind through races to make money is one which basically every racing game does, but it's one which they shouldn't do, because that's just not the way it works with buying and selling cars in real life. Yeah, if you want to go out and drive over and over again on the same race to earn that cash, then you can do that. But there should also be a way, I think, and I know that some of you guys would agree with this, some maybe not, but I think you should go out and buy something like, for instance, let's say a Pagani Zonda F, if that was on the game. The simple fact is, in real life, the Pagani Zonda F cost around £450,000. Now, to buy a used one will cost you easily £1 million. That's more than double the value. That should happen on the game. Now, obviously, that's over a number of years, and I'm not saying that you should literally have to wait that amount of years on a game for that to happen. No, of course not. But I do believe that certain cars should have a set value after you've bought them. So maybe, for instance, with the whole Zonda analogy, maybe you buy the Zonda for 400,000 credits, then you go to your garage and you go to sell the car, and you can sell it immediately for 400,000 credits. So you actually lose no money if you change your mind and want to sell the car. But what then happens is, using in-game time, which Gran Turismo has always had, working through the days, the used car dealerships used to change every so many days, all that kind of thing. What if, in game days, the car's value would actually increase, just like it does in real life? And not necessarily 6 or 7 years later, but maybe a month later, in game days, the value would increase to maybe 450 grand. That, I think, would be really cool, because it would allow those of us, such as myself, who consider themselves to be more of a businessman than a racing driver — that's definitely me, I enjoy buying cars and tuning them a lot more than racing in them — that would allow us to really enjoy that aspect of the game, and it would allow us to do what we're good at. Because I'm a lot better at making money on games than I am at winning races, because they are two totally different things. Winning races has never really been that important to me. Of course, winning races is nice, but to me it's always been a means to an end. I only race to unlock the cars that I want. If that incentive wasn't there, I wouldn't do it. If you didn't win any money for it, or if you just had access to all of the cars without needing to buy any, on something like Project Gotham, for instance, in free run mode, then I wouldn't, because that's what I'm there for, just to enjoy driving. So that's it for my first point. That's something which I would love to see, and you kind of have that on some games with the auction house, for instance, on Forza. I think there was also an auction house or whatever on Gran Turismo 5, and that was cool, but that doesn't work in the same way, because then you're at the mercy of someone buying the car, whereas what I'm talking about is more just resale value if you're selling it back to the game, in effect. But that's something that I'd like to see. The second thing that I would like to see implemented better on games, and Forza is definitely leading the market in this way at the moment, is having better conversion options on a vehicle. Be it engine swaps, drivetrain swaps, aspiration swaps. But what I would like to see happen is for it to go even more in depth than Forza does. Obviously, you're reliant on the power of the console, but at the moment it's very safe. The conversions that you can do are very safe. Some of them are extreme, but they're still expected. On Forza Horizon, for instance, you can put a 1500 horsepower Lamborghini Aventador engine, when tuned obviously, into a number of other vehicles. That's cool, but it's not that insane. It's a powerful engine, but that's not really thinking outside of the box that much. with some cars on the game you can do stuff like fitting a motorbike engine. That's cool. That's more what I'm talking about. Stuff which is more outside the box. Now, the motorbike engine doesn't make it the fastest in the game, but that's not my point. I'm not asking for things to make them the best in the game. I just like having the option there to try something different. Something a bit more oddball, more for the fun factor, rather than just trying to be the best all the time. Because if you're trying to be the best, the obvious thing is to fit the Lambo engine. But sometimes it's about more than being the best. It's just about having fun, trying something new, and experimenting. And at the end of the day, a lot of very cool cars are a direct result of that concept. Experimenting, be it race cars or road cars. So what I would like to see is stuff more like not just swapping to, say, a V8 or swap it to a V12, but stuff that's totally different to that. Like, what if, for instance, I want to buy a Corvette, and instead of swapping it to a V10 or a V12, what if I want to make it electric? Have the option there to swap it, say for instance, to a couple of Tesla motors, and make it all-wheel drive with a Tesla P100D layout. What if I want to do that? That could be cool. Now, not everyone loves electric cars. Personally, I do. But for those of us that do like that, and to be fair, there are plenty of people who do love Teslas. They have a big fan base. So that fan base for electric cars is clearly there. There are also people who, like myself, who love the Rimac Concept 1. It's one of my favourite cars, one of the fastest electric cars in the world. So those people are there who would like to see that. But even beyond electric stuff, what if you could swap something to not necessarily an engine which is insane, but maybe just different? Maybe an engine which is actually lesser powered than the one which you're currently using. As an example, let's try and think of something. Maybe you wanted to, for instance, say buy a Ford Focus, say a Ford Focus RS, the newer one with the all-wheel drive, and let's say instead of wanting to put an LS engine into it or a V12 or whatever, what if I wanted to take that Ford Focus and instead fit an RS200 engine into it from back in the day, that kind of old school rally engine? You can do stuff like that on Forza with rally engines, but that kind of more personalised feel where different cars will have different options of engines which can or can't fit into their engine bay. For instance, you cannot put an Aventador engine into a Focus. It's quite simply not going to fit under the hood. And again, that brings me to another point. Not just engine swaps, but what about layout swaps? Of course, you can convert to all-wheel drive, you can convert a Ford Focus to rear-wheel drive, etc. And that's cool, that's very cool. But what about swapping the engine location? Do a Clio V6, make yourself a mid-engine rear-wheel drive Focus ST. That's what Renault did, and look how loved the Renault Clio V6 is, or the Renault 5 Turbo. What if I wanted to buy a Subaru Impreza hatchback and make it like the Subaru equivalent of a Porsche? You've got that flat boxer engine, so why not make a rear engine, rear-wheel drive Impreza hatchback? I'm not saying it would be better, probably not. It would probably ruin the handling, but at least it gives you that kind of creativity, which would be really cool to play around with. And it would mean that there are so many different possible variations that people could try that no two cars would be exactly the same. Now, obviously, as I said, that would take a huge amount of development to put into the game and a huge amount of processing and memory power. But at the end of the day, these consoles cost a lot of money. So if you're buying them, you want them to be exploring possibilities like this on a game. Otherwise, what's the point of buying this new console if the game isn't really any better than, say, the PS3 version could have been? Because at the end of the day, graphics aren't everything. We want more from the game. We don't just want a prettier game. So get out there, try something different. It might slow the game down, it might make it a little bit laggy, but to be fair, and let's be honest about this, people only complain about lagging because it's the popular thing to do. If you played a PS2 game or a PS1 game that was laggy occasionally, and many of them are, you don't hear people back then saying, oh, this is a rubbish game, I wouldn't play it because it's laggy. People just accepted it because that was the time. Whereas now, it's popular to hate on things. Oh, this game's laggy. Well, what do you expect? Look at the graphics, listen to the sound. Of course it's going to lag every so often. People expect perfection, and that just isn't going to happen. You can get close to it, but it's never going to happen. You're never going to have a perfect game that never crashes. Consider me. I bought the Xbox One, brand new. I bought Horizon 3, brand new. The game crashes still. Of course it does, because things aren't built in the way that they used to be, and things aren't perfect. But that's a tangent anyway. My point was that I would like to see these kind of alternative ideas. And another thing which I've noticed is, again, especially on Forza, you can often convert, for instance, a front-wheel drive car to being rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, but you can never do it the other way round. Now, you could ask, why would you want to? But I have specific reasons why I would want to. What if I want to buy a Nissan GTR, for instance, an R35, and I don't want to make it rear-wheel drive, which you can do? What if I want to make it front-wheel drive? Now, of course, it's going to be worse, but imagine how quick a front-wheel drive GTR could be for front-wheel drive racing events. It could give you so many more opportunities to make these crazy, unique vehicle builds, and it would be so much fun to play around with. But as I said, with the electric motor conversions and that kind of thing, it's just more that imagination side of things which I would like to see explored more. There are certainly steps being taken in the right direction by Forza, for instance, with engine swaps, drivetrain swaps, swapping between naturally aspirated, supercharged, turbocharged. It's all good stuff, but I would just like to see it be a bit more out of the box, take a few more chances. Because, let's face it, a lot of older racing games took more chances than they do now. Gran Turismo 2, for instance, had better visual tuning than any of the Gran Turismo games that have come after it. You used to be able to buy certain road cars, quite a few of them in fact, and convert them into racing cars. And I don't mean slap a silly wing on it and a fake-looking carbon fibre body kit like on GT5 or GT6. I mean full-on race car conversions. You could literally buy a Ford Taurus on that game and turn it into a full-on NASCAR. You can't even get close to doing stuff like that now on Gran Turismo. That was a much older game, but that was revolutionary, and it's actually gotten worse in that regard since then. So you don't necessarily have to be the latest and greatest to try something different. That's an older game, and it had that, and the newer ones don't. It's just that creativity, which I would like to see explored more. Another thing which I would like to see implemented into racing games, and this is one of the ones which has been featured here or there in different ways, is more integrated sponsorships in games. Now, as I said, there are certain games which do have that. I believe either Assetto Corsa or Project Cars, or maybe even both, I can't remember. I think they have stuff to do with sponsorships. I believe Need for Speed Pro Street had some sponsorship options, and of course Road Trip Adventure had sponsorships where you would get paid for driving a certain distance with an advert on the roof of your car. That kind of stuff really appeals to me because, again, just like with the appreciating value cars, it allows people who aren't just playing the game to race non-stop to explore business opportunities, to become a businessman, to learn what kind of options are there for earning cash more than just driving lap after lap of the same old boring track which happens to give you a good amount of cash. So I would like to see stuff like those sponsorships integrated more into stuff like Forza and Gran Turismo, because although other games have had it, Gran Turismo and Forza never really have had that. On Forza you can do liveries, but you don't get paid for it in that way. You can sell them on the storefront, of course, but you don't get paid for sponsorships. What if on the game, for instance, you could select from dozens of real-world sponsorship liveries, or variations on the theme, be it Hankook, Gulf, Esso, Castrol, Calsonic, Pennzoil, loads of different livery options, and fit that livery to your car and then get paid by that fictional in-game company. Obviously it's a real company, but I mean paid with in-game money for driving or for winning races or for just having that as your brand. Maybe that also gives you a bit of money off of certain things, like for instance the manufacturer affinity used to do on Forza. You would drive with a certain car and it would get you money off of that manufacturer's stuff or those parts or whatever. That was a really good thing to have. So as I said, that's one of those things which I would like to see more of that has been featured, but the ways that it has been featured have been a bit more hit and miss. certain games will have certain aspects of that concept, but I've never seen a game feature it in a well-rounded way that features all of those together. It's always just dribs and drabs of one game will have this part of it, one game will have that part, but none of them do it all. And of course you could say that I'm asking a lot of these developers, but yes, that's right, I am asking a lot. After all, we are paying them our money. We should be asking for more. We shouldn't just be happy with the same old game over and over again. We want the game to get better, we want them to take chances, and we want the games to be different, not just another racing game. That's what I want to see, and if I'm putting down my money on a console and on a game and on DLC, you bet your backside I want to see new stuff on that game. Another thing that I would like to see featured better on certain games is deterioration, visual deterioration on vehicles. And I'm not talking about damage, strictly speaking. Some games have had damage, of course. Forza does, Gran Turismo has here and there. NASCAR games generally have pretty good damage. WRC games have excellent damage. In fact, rally games in general do tend to have much, much better visual damage than road racing games do. But what I'm talking about is slightly different, and this is another thing which would take a lot of processing power. It would probably be glitchy, especially in its infancy, and it would require more from the graphics engine of the game. But what I would like to see is, especially for instance in endurance races, if you look at pictures from endurance races, especially from back in the day, like the Le Mans for instance, from say the 70s, the 80s or even earlier, the cars would finish the race in poor condition. Some of the cars, for instance, like a Ferrari 512 LM, for instance, that finished the Le Mans back in the 70s, literally with duct tape, holding the headlights in and holding the windscreen in. The car was covered in dirt and dust, and you could see that clean shape in the windshield, where the window wipers have been going back and forth, wiping away the dust of the race. That looks awesome, and you can actually buy a model car of that Ferrari with all the duct tape on it. Obviously it's plastic to look like duct tape, but it looks awesome, and that I would love to see. Not in every race in the game, but just for the endurance races, like the literal 24-hour races that used to be in Gran Turismo. Have a car, and then each time you pit in with the car or gain whatever damage, have it so that the graphics update themselves while you're in the pit lane, and when you drive out, maybe you've got a bit of masking tape covering a crack in the windshield. Maybe you've got them holding the headlights in. Maybe you've got thick muck, like dust, all over the car with that, as I said, that shape where the windscreen wipers have been wiping away the dust. To me, that would just be so cool, and it would give it that authentic look, especially on those older race cars. Now again, as I said, that would take a lot out of the processing of the game, the graphics engine, all that kind of stuff, but if you focus just on having that in the 24-hour races, I think that could be a really cool thing to have. Especially for photo mode, you could take a photo of your car with all this duct tape holding it together with damage, cracked body panels, that kind of stuff, and it could look awesome for photo modes, and it would make the experience, because that's what endurance races are, they are an immersive experience, all the more real feeling. And just quickly before the end of this video, the other two things which I would love to see implemented are swappage, if you will, of parts between cars, like a Golf with Bentley wheels, for instance, that kind of thing, and also paying for the stuff that you use, like paying for fuel, or paying to replace parts that you break. And again, certain games have implemented stuff like that, but it's never really been a full-on part of the game, at least that I can remember. But that's it overall for this particular episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below of stuff that you would like to see featured in a racing game, and I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.